Imagine you are the toughest, most ruthless general in the United States Army. Your nickname is Old Blood and Guts. You openly believe that black soldiers are inferior, that they lack courage, and are incapable of combat. But now, it's the winter of 1944. The German army has just launched a massive counteroffensive in the Ardennes, shattering your lines. Your men are surrounded, freezing, and being slaughtered. You desperately need a spearhead, a tank unit that can smash through the best of the SS Panzer divisions. And the only unit available is a battalion of black tankers you never wanted, a unit you called the Bastards. You turn to them and say, "I don't care what color you are, so long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches." They did, and they didn't stop fighting for 183 straight days. Before they became General Patton's spearhead, the 761st Tank Battalion had to fight a war just to exist. Their story begins not in the snow-covered battlefields of Belgium, but in the crucible of American segregation. In 1941, as America geared up for war, the U.S. military was a mirror of Jim Crow society. The Army's high command, for the most part, was convinced of one thing: black men were not suited for armored combat. They could drive trucks, load ammunition, dig ditches, but to entrust them with the responsibility of a 30-ton war machine, a Sherman tank, was considered folly. They were said to lack the mechanical aptitude, the cool-headedness under fire, and the tactical intelligence required to go up against the German blitzkrieg. Yet, the reality of total war demanded manpower. All black armored units were authorized, more out of necessity than conviction. At Camp Claiborne, Louisiana, a land steeped in the ideology of white supremacy, the 761st Tank Battalion was born. From day one, these men understood they were fighting a two-front war. Outside the base, they faced the daily humiliation of Jim Crow laws, separate water fountains, threats of violence, a system designed to remind them of their place. Inside the base, they faced the pervasive skepticism of the military establishment. They were a test case, an experiment. Every drill was an examination, every maneuver scrutinized for signs of failure. Their white drill instructors, while professional, pushed them harder, tested them more severely than their white counterparts. They had to not only master the complexities of the Sherman tank, its mechanics, its gunnery, its tactics, but they had to do it, knowing that the slightest mistake would be used as proof of their supposed inferiority. But instead of breaking, they bonded. In the sweltering heat of Louisiana, they forged a brotherhood. They learned to trust the man sitting next to them in the cramped turret of a Sherman, because they knew the world outside would grant them no trust at all. Their drivers became experts, their gunners lethally accurate, their mechanics geniuses of improvisation. They adopted a patch, a ferocious Black Panther's head, and a motto that summed up their spirit: come out fighting. It was not a suggestion, it was a promise. For 2 years, they trained relentlessly, becoming one of the best trained tank units in the entire U.S. Army. Yet, they remained stateside. Less experienced white units were shipped off to combat in Europe, while the Black Panthers languished in Louisiana, and later, Texas. The High Command hesitated, unsure or unwilling to deploy black armored troops to the European theater. The rumor was that they would never see combat, that they would end up guarding bases or being broken up. But one man had his eye on them, a general as brilliant and as controversial as America had ever produced: General George S. Patton, Jr. Patton was a walking paradox. He was a genius military tactician, a fierce warrior who demanded excellence. He was also an avowed racist, whose views on black soldiers were in line with the worst prejudices of his time. But Patton had one quality that transcended his bigotry. He was a ruthless pragmatist. He cared about one thing more than race: winning. And as he prepared to lead his Third Army across France, he needed good tank units. Against the advice of many, he specifically requested the 761st. In October of 1944, as the battalion prepared to ship out to Europe, Patton addressed them. His speech became the stuff of legend. He stood before them, 1,000 black men in uniform, and did not mince words. "Men," he reportedly said, "you're the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I don't care what color you are, so long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Don't let me down." For the men of the 761st, this was the moment they had been waiting for. The skepticism was still there, even in their general's words. But it was also a challenge. The toughest general in the Army was giving them a chance to prove their worth on the world's biggest stage. They had no intention of letting him down. The 761st Tank Battalion arrived in France in October 1944, a landscape scarred by years of war, but buzzing with the energy of liberation. The Normandy landings had happened just a few months prior, and now General Patton's Third Army was a steel juggernaut, relentlessly pushing the German forces back toward their own border. This was the environment the Black Panthers were thrown into. There was no time for a gentle introduction, no period of adjustment. They were immediately attached to the 26th Infantry Division, and on November 7th, 1944, they went into combat for the first time near the town of Moyenvich. The war, which had been an abstract concept for 2 long years of training, was now terrifyingly real. Their first engagement was a brutal awakening. They were tasked with spearheading an assault against heavily fortified German positions. The enemy was dug in, waiting for them with anti-tank guns, machine gun nests, and pre-sighted artillery. As the Sherman tanks of the 761st rolled forward across the muddy French countryside, they were met with a storm of fire. The sharp, terrifying crack of an 88mm anti-tank gun was a sound that would haunt their dreams. In those first few hours, they learned the brutal calculus of armored warfare. They saw their first tank brew up, a horrifying sight where a direct hit turns a 30-ton steel machine into an inferno, often with no chance for the crew to escape. They lost men, good men they had trained with, men who were part of their Louisiana-forged brotherhood. Lesser units, in their first taste of combat, might have faltered, might have pulled back, but the 761st remembered their motto, "Come out fighting." They did not pull back. They pushed forward. They engaged the enemy anti-tank guns, their gunners using high explosive shells to suppress the positions, while other tanks maneuvered to get a clear shot. Their commanders, men like Captain John D. Long, were on the front line, directing the battle from the open hatches of their tanks, exposed to enemy fire. Their performance was not just competent, it was aggressive, skillful, and incredibly brave. By the end of that first day, they had taken their objectives, destroyed numerous enemy positions, and inflicted heavy casualties. But they had also paid a price in blood. The war had welcomed them with its cruelest embrace. This first battle set the tone for what was to come. The 761st quickly earned a reputation as a spearhead battalion. Because they were a separate, independent unit, they were not permanently attached to any single division. Instead, they were used as a mobile, elite force, a fire brigade that Patton could attach to whichever division was facing the toughest resistance. It was a testament to their skill, but it was also a curse. It meant they were constantly being sent to the most dangerous, most heavily contested sectors of the front. They were the battering ram used to break down the strongest parts of the German line. One of their most legendary soldiers emerged in these early battles, Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. Rivers was a quiet, determined tanker who seemed to possess an almost supernatural lack of fear. During a fierce engagement near the town of Gwebling, his tank hit a mine, disabling it and severely wounding him in the leg. As medics tried to evacuate him, he refused, saying, "This is one order I will not obey. I will not leave my men." He took command of another tank and continued to lead the assault, directing fire and destroying enemy positions. For his actions that day, he would be recommended for the Medal of Honor. It was a recommendation that would, like so much of their story, get lost in the corridors of a racially biased bureaucracy for decades. Through November and into December, the 761st continued its relentless push across France, fighting in a series of brutal, grinding battles. They liberated towns, they destroyed German armor, and they earned the grudging respect of the white infantrymen they fought alongside. The grunts on the ground came to see the Black Panther emblem on the side of a Sherman as a welcome sight. It meant that help had arrived. It meant that the Black Panthers were there to blast a path for them through the German defenses. But their greatest test was yet to come. In mid-December 1944, Hitler launched his last, desperate gamble of the war. A massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, a move that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. The German offensive smashed through the American lines, creating a huge bulge in the front and encircling the 101st Airborne Division at the crucial crossroads town of Bastogne. It was the darkest moment of the war in Europe for the Allies. Patton's Third Army was ordered to pivot 90 degrees and attack the southern flank of the Bulge to relieve the besieged defenders of Bastogne. And who did Patton choose to lead this critical, desperate counterattack? He chose the 761st Tank Battalion. They were about to be thrown into one of the most famous and brutal battles in American military history. The Battle of the Bulge was a desperate, chaotic fight for survival. The German offensive had caught the Allies completely by surprise, and the American forces in the Ardennes were reeling, disorganized, and fighting for their lives. The weather was atrocious, one of the coldest European winters on record. Snow was deep on the ground, temperatures plunged far below zero, and a thick, persistent fog grounded the Allied air forces, taking away their greatest advantage. It was a perfect storm of military and meteorological hell, a landscape of frozen forests, snow-choked roads, and near-constant combat. This was the world the 761st Tank Battalion was ordered to spearhead. Patton's famous directive to them at the start of the counteroffensive was a testament to the brutal task ahead. He was not asking for a cautious advance. He was demanding a blitzkrieg in reverse. "I want you to get up there," he commanded, "and break them up." For the men of the 761st, this meant fighting a war under the most extreme conditions imaginable. Their Sherman tanks, which had been designed for the more temperate fields of France, struggled in the ice and snow. The steel tracks would slip on the frozen roads, and the engines, not winterized, were difficult to start in the biting cold. The men themselves were not equipped for this kind of Arctic warfare. Many still had their standard leather boots, which quickly became soaked and frozen, leading to rampant cases of trench foot and frostbite. But their greatest enemy, apart from the Germans, was the terrain and the weather. The fog was so thick that visibility was often reduced to just a few yards. Tank commanders had to stand exposed in their open hatches, peering into the white void, knowing that a German anti-tank team could be lurking just beyond their sight, waiting with a Panzerfaust. The forests of the Ardennes were dense, the narrow roads perfect for ambushes. The Germans, including elite SS Panzer divisions, were masters of this kind of defensive warfare. They would let the lead American tanks pass, and then open up from concealed positions on the flanks, creating a deadly kill zone. It was in this frozen hell that the 761st proved its true mettle. They fought with a relentless, grinding ferocity that stunned both friend and foe. They led the charge into heavily defended towns, their tanks acting as mobile artillery, blasting German machine gun nests out of buildings to allow the infantry to advance. The fighting was often house to house, a brutal close quarters affair where a tank turning a corner could come face to face with a German Tiger or Panther tank, machines that vastly outgunned their Shermans. The story of Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers during this battle became a legend that encapsulated the spirit of the entire battalion. On November 19th, as the 761st pushed toward the town of Bugletroff, Rivers' tank was once again at the point of the spear. As they advanced, they ran into a roadblock defended by multiple German anti-tank guns. Rivers' tank was hit, killing his gunner and wounding the rest of the crew. Refusing to abandon the advance, he took over the .50 caliber machine gun on top of the tank and, completely exposed to enemy fire, began laying down a torrent of suppressive fire on the German positions. His actions allowed the rest of his company to pull back and regroup. But he was not done. Despite his own severe wounds from the earlier mine incident, and against the direct orders of his commanding officer to retreat and seek medical attention, Rivers took command of another tank. He and another tank, led by a man named David Williams, then launched a 2-tank assault on the heavily defended town. They charged forward, firing on the move, creating chaos and drawing the enemy's fire. As they neared the town, Rivers' tank was hit again, this time by 2 direct shells from a German tank destroyer. The tank exploded, killing him instantly, but his sacrifice was not in vain. His audacious charge had revealed the enemy's main defensive positions, allowing the rest of the American force to call in an artillery strike and eventually take the town. Sergeant Reuben Rivers had lived the battalion's motto. He had come out fighting, and he had fought until his last breath. His commanding officer would once again recommend him for the Medal of Honor, writing that his supreme, heroic, and gallant actions were a testament to the highest traditions of the military service. This was the kind of courage the 761st displayed day after day for weeks on end. They fought their way through a series of heavily defended Belgian towns with names that would be etched in their memory: Tillet, Moyenvik, Morville-les-Vic. In the battle for Tillet, they were engaged in a brutal 15-day struggle against an entrenched German division. They fought in near blizzard conditions, their tanks often acting as the only source of warmth for the freezing infantrymen who huddled behind them. By the time the Battle of the Bulge was finally won in late January 1945, the 761st Tank Battalion was a battered but unbroken unit. They had been in continuous combat for weeks, had suffered heavy casualties, and had endured conditions that would have broken lesser men. They had been instrumental in relieving the defenders of Bastogne, and had been a key factor in the success of Patton's counteroffensive. They had faced down the best of the German army in the worst possible conditions, and had emerged victorious. General Patton, the man who had once harbored such deep-seated prejudices, was forced to acknowledge their greatness. He would later state that the 761st was one of the most effective tank battalions in the war. The experiment was over. The verdict, rendered in the ice and blood of the Ardennes, was undeniable. The end of the Battle of the Bulge was not the end of the war for the 761st. For them, there was no rest, no rotation to the rear. They had proven themselves to be too valuable, too effective as a spearhead unit. As soon as the German offensive in the Ardennes was broken, Patton's Third Army began its final, massive push eastward, across the Rhine and into the heart of the German Reich. And leading the charge, as always, were the Black Panthers. The fighting in Germany was different. It was a war of relentless pursuit. The German army was shattered, retreating, but still dangerous. They fought a desperate, bitter rearguard action, defending every town, every river crossing, with a fanaticism born of desperation. For the tankers of the 761st, this meant a fast-moving, chaotic style of warfare. They were often operating far ahead of the main infantry force, punching holes in the German lines, creating chaos in their rear areas, and cutting off retreating enemy units. They fought their way through the Siegfried Line, Germany's vaunted, heavily fortified western border, a place the Nazi propaganda had claimed was impenetrable. The 761st, attached to the 103rd Infantry Division, was one of the first American units to breach it. They used their Sherman tanks to systematically reduce the German concrete pillboxes and bunkers, their 75mm guns blasting away at the fortifications at point-blank range, while their machine guns suppressed the defenders. It was slow, dangerous, and methodical work, a testament to their skill and their courage. As they pushed deeper into Germany, they were not just soldiers, they were liberators. They rolled into German towns, their black faces a startling sight to the German civilians who had been fed a diet of racist Nazi propaganda for years. But for the thousands of Allied prisoners of war and the slave laborers from across Europe whom the Germans had forced to work in their factories, the sight of the Black Panther emblem on the side of a Sherman was the symbol of freedom. But in May of 1945, near the Austrian border, the 761st Tank Battalion would encounter a scene so horrific, so profoundly evil, that it would eclipse all the other horrors of the war they had witnessed. They were one of the first American units to reach the Gunskirchen Lager concentration camp, a sub-camp of the infamous Mauthausen network. What they found there was a vision of hell on earth. The camp was a nightmare of starvation, disease, and death. As they approached, the stench was overwhelming. Inside, they found thousands of prisoners, mostly Jewish people from Hungary, who were barely alive. They were living skeletons, their bodies racked by typhus and dysentery, their eyes hollowed out by unimaginable suffering. The ground was littered with the dead and the dying. There was no food, no water, no sanitation. It was a factory of human misery, a place where the Nazi ideology of racial hatred had been taken to its logical, horrifying conclusion. For the men of the 761st, this was a moment of profound and terrible clarity. They were black men from a segregated America who had spent their entire lives fighting against a system of racial prejudice. And here, in the heart of the defeated Third Reich, they were staring into the abyss of where that same logic of racial supremacy ultimately leads. They saw in the emaciated faces of the Jewish prisoners a reflection of their own struggle. This was the enemy they had been fighting. This was the evil they had crossed an ocean to destroy. The hardened tankers, men who had seen their friends die in burning tanks, men who had fought through the frozen hell of the Ardennes, were shaken to their core. Many of them wept openly at the sight. They immediately went to work, not as soldiers, but as humanitarians. They shared their own rations with the starving prisoners. They used their medical supplies to tend to the sick. They helped to evacuate the survivors and to bury the dead with some measure of dignity. That discovery crystallized the meaning of their war. They were not just fighting for America, a country that still treated them as second-class citizens. They were fighting for something far greater. They were fighting for the very idea of human dignity. They were fighting against the monstrous idea that one group of people has the right to dehumanize, enslave, and exterminate another. In that moment, their double V campaign, victory over fascism abroad and victory over racism at home, became one and the same fight. The evil of Gunskirchen and the evil of Jim Crow were born of the same poisonous root. Just a few days later, on May 8, 1945, the war in Europe officially ended. The 761st had fought its last battle. Over the course of their service, they had been in continuous combat for 183 days. They had fought their way through 4 countries. They had inflicted over 130,000 casualties on the enemy. They had captured or destroyed thousands of German machine gun nests, vehicles, and artillery pieces. They had liberated dozens of towns and 1 concentration camp. And they had paid a heavy price, suffering a nearly 50% casualty rate in their own ranks. By any measure, their combat record was extraordinary, one of the finest of any American armored unit in the war. They had done everything that was asked of them, and more. They had not let Patton down. The only question that remained was, would their country now let them down? The end of the war in Europe was a moment of profound relief and quiet pride for the surviving members of the 761st Tank Battalion. They had endured, they had triumphed, and now they were going home. They had left America as an experiment, a group of men burdened with the weight of proving their entire race's worth. They were returning as a highly decorated, combat-hardened unit, a spearhead of Patton's legendary Third Army. They had faced the best of the Wehrmacht and the SS and had not been found wanting. They had liberated towns and concentration camps. They carried with them the respect of the white infantry units they had fought alongside and the grudging admiration of their own famously prejudiced general. Surely, the nation they were returning to would see them not as a separate Negro unit, but as American heroes, plain and simple. But the America they returned to in late 1945 had not been transformed by the war in the same way they had. The victory over Nazi Germany's master race ideology had not led to a soul-searching reappraisal of America's own system of white supremacy. As the men of the 761st disembarked from the transport ships, they stepped back into a world of Jim Crow. The separate water fountains, the back of the bus orders, the casual and constant humiliations of a segregated society were all waiting for them. The uniform and the medals they wore with such pride were once again seen not as symbols of service, but as targets of resentment. The psychological shock was immense. On the battlefields of Europe, their skill, their courage, and the Black Panther emblem on their tanks had commanded respect. Back home, that respect vanished. They were once again expected to be deferential, to be invisible, to know their place. For men who had commanded 30-ton tanks and faced down German 88s, this was an impossible and infuriating demand. They had been treated as equals in the shared hell of combat, only to be stripped of that equality the moment they set foot back on American soil. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. This sense of betrayal was compounded by a new and even more insidious battle, the battle for their story. In the immediate aftermath of the war, as the histories were being written and the heroes were being celebrated, the contributions of the 761st and other black units were systematically downplayed, marginalized, and in many cases, completely erased. The official histories of the Battle of the Bulge, for example, would spend pages detailing the actions of white divisions, while giving the Black Panthers, who had been a crucial spearhead for Patton's relief force, a mere passing mention, if they were mentioned at all. Their combat record, as extraordinary as it was allowed to fade into obscurity. The promise of recognition, the awards and medals they had been recommended for in the heat of battle, got lost in the bureaucratic maze of the post-war army. Most shockingly, the Medal of Honor recommendation for Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers, a man whose bravery had been so supreme and so well documented that it should have been an open and shut case, was quietly denied. The official reasons were flimsy and technical, but the real reason was unspoken but understood by all. In 1945, the U.S. Army was not ready to bestow its highest honor for combat valor upon a black man. Not a single one was awarded to a black soldier for their service in World War II at the time. The men of the 761st, like so many other black veterans, were also systematically denied the full benefits of the GI Bill, the single most transformative piece of social legislation of the 20th century. While this bill lifted a generation of white veterans into the middle class through access to free college education and low-interest home loans, black veterans were largely excluded. They were denied loans by racist banking practices and shut out of the new suburban housing developments that were springing up across the country. They had fought for the American dream, only to be told that that dream was not for them. Faced with this wall of indifference and injustice, the men of the 761st did what they had always done. They relied on each other. The brotherhood that had been forged in the swamps of Camp Claiborne and tested in the snows of the Ardennes endured. They held reunions, they formed veterans associations, and they kept their own history alive. They became the guardians of their own memory, refusing to let their sacrifices be forgotten. They knew what they had done. They knew what they had proven, and they were determined that one day the rest of the country would know it too. Their fight for recognition would be a long and arduous one, a slow, grinding campaign that would last for decades. It was a fight waged not with tanks and machine guns, but with letters, with petitions, with the quiet, dignified testimony of aging veterans. They were fighting against the inertia of a nation that found it easier to celebrate a simplified, whitewashed version of its own history. But the men of the 761st had faced down the German army. They were not about to be defeated by apathy. They had come out fighting, and they would continue to fight for as long as it took to claim their rightful place in the American story. Their war was not over. It had just moved to a different battlefield. For over 30 years, the story of the 761st Tank Battalion was a ghost story, a tale told by the men who had lived it, but largely invisible to the nation they had fought for. The post-war era was a time of national myth-making, a period where the narrative of the good war and the greatest generation was being forged. It was a narrative of unity, of a nation coming together to defeat a common foe. And in that clean, simple story, the messy, uncomfortable truths of segregation and racial injustice were often edited out. The contributions of the nearly 1 million African Americans who had served in the armed forces were systematically minimized, their heroism rendered a footnote. The men of the 761st were acutely aware of this erasure. While they saw books being written and films being made that celebrated the heroes of the Battle of the Bulge, their own crucial role as Patton's spearhead was almost never mentioned. They were living witnesses to their own disappearance from history. But the brotherhood that had been forged in combat did not dissolve. They held reunions, forming a national association to keep their bonds and their memories alive. These gatherings were more than just social events. They were acts of historical preservation. They were a way of saying, we were there, we remember, and we will not let you forget. The fight for recognition was a slow, grinding, and often disheartening process. It was a war of 1,000 letters, a campaign waged against a bureaucratic fortress that seemed as impenetrable as the Siegfried Line they had once breached. They wrote to their congressmen, to the Department of the Army, to historians, providing testimony, affidavits, and their own meticulously kept records of their 183 days in combat. They were not asking for special treatment. They were asking for the truth to be told. They were asking for the awards and commendations that had been earned in blood to be finally bestowed. One of the most painful and persistent battles was the fight to get the Medal of Honor for Sergeant Reuben Rivers. The evidence of his supreme valor was overwhelming. His commanding officer, Captain David Williams, had witnessed his heroic actions and had personally recommended him for the nation's highest award not once but twice. The paperwork had been submitted, but somewhere in the chain of command, in the racially biased bureaucracy of the 1940s Army, it had vanished. For decades, Captain Williams, a white officer, made it his personal mission to right this historical wrong. He wrote letters, gave interviews, and tirelessly lobbied the military establishment, haunted by the promise he had made to his fallen sergeant. The denial of Rivers's medal was, for the veterans of the 761st, the most glaring symbol of the nation's ingratitude. The political climate began to shift, however slowly, with the coming of the Civil Rights Movement. As the nation was forced to confront the realities of its own systemic racism, the stories of black veterans from World War II began to gain new resonance. They were the living embodiment of the hypocrisy that the movement was fighting against. How could a nation deny basic rights to men who had fought and bled to defend it? The story of the 761st, with its undeniable record of heroism, became a powerful piece of evidence in this larger struggle for justice. Finally, in 1978, more than 3 decades after the end of the war, the first major crack in the wall of silence appeared. After a long campaign by the veterans and their supporters, President Jimmy Carter officially recognized the 761st Tank Battalion's extraordinary combat record by awarding them the Presidential Unit Citation. It was a long overdue honor, a formal, public acknowledgement from the nation that their service had been exceptional. For the aging veterans, it was a moment of profound, bittersweet vindication. They had finally received a measure of the recognition they had fought for so long. But the fight was not over. The Presidential Unit Citation honored the battalion as a whole, but the individual acts of heroism, most notably that of Reuben Rivers, still remained unrecognized. The battle continued, now carried on by a new generation of historians, journalists, and politicians who had become inspired by their story. The 1990s saw a major review by the Army of the Records of Black Soldiers from World War II, an official admission that racial bias had likely prevented many from receiving the awards they deserved. This review, combined with the relentless pressure from Reuben Rivers' family and his former commanding officer, finally brought his case to the forefront. The lost paperwork was reconstructed, the eyewitness testimonies were re-examined, and the evidence of his incredible bravery was found to be undeniable. In 1997, 53 years after he was killed in action in France, President Bill Clinton posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor to Staff Sergeant Reuben Rivers. At a solemn ceremony at the White House, the president presented the medal to Rivers' surviving family members. It was a moment of immense historical significance, a correction of a half-century-old injustice, and a final validation of a hero's sacrifice. With that act, the nation finally acknowledged what the men of the 761st had known all along, that Reuben Rivers was one of the greatest heroes of the greatest generation, regardless of his race. The long war for his honor was finally over. The long overdue honors bestowed upon the 761st Tank Battalion were more than just symbolic gestures. They were a national reckoning, a belated admission of a profound historical truth. The story of the Black Panthers is not merely a tale of battlefield valor. It is a powerful and enduring lesson in the nature of courage, the poison of prejudice, and the complex, often contradictory, meaning of patriotism. Their legacy forces us to look beyond the simplistic narratives of war and confront the deeper, messier truths of the American experience. What then is the ultimate meaning of their 183 days of continuous combat? First, it stands as one of the most powerful refutations of racial stereotypes in American history. The very foundation of segregation in the military was built on a series of demeaning and baseless lies. That black men lacked the intelligence for complex machinery, the discipline for sustained combat, and the courage to face a determined enemy. The 761st did not just challenge these lies. They systematically dismantled them with a performance of such undeniable excellence that it left their critics speechless. They mastered the Sherman tank, a complex piece of machinery. They maintained their discipline through the hell of the Battle of the Bulge. And their courage was so exceptional that it earned the respect of one of America's most notoriously racist generals. They proved that the qualities of a good soldier, skill, discipline, bravery, have absolutely nothing to do with the color of a man's skin. This was not an argument they made with words. It was a truth they wrote in steel and fire across the battlefields of Europe. Second, their story is a profound lesson in the true meaning of brotherhood. They were denied entry into the traditional, all-white brotherhood of the American military. So, in the swamps of Camp Claiborne and the frozen forests of the Ardennes, they forged a brotherhood of their own, one that was arguably stronger and more profound. It was a bond forged in the shared experience of fighting a two-front war, against the German army in front of them, and against the racism of their own country surrounding them. This dual struggle created a level of interdependence and mutual reliance that was unique. They knew that the world was watching, waiting for them to fail, and that their only true allies were the men sitting next to them in the cramped, cold confines of their tanks. This is the kind of bond that is not bestowed by an institution, but earned in the crucible of shared adversity. It is a testament to the fact that the most powerful human connections are often created in the very spaces that are designed to isolate and divide us. Third, the story of the 761st forces us to grapple with a more complex and challenging definition of patriotism. These men fought and bled for a nation that did not yet consider them full citizens. They defended a flag that for them represented both the ideal of freedom and the reality of oppression. Their decision to serve was not a simple act of nationalistic fervor. It was a profound act of faith. It was a belief in an America that did not yet exist. They were fighting for the promise of America, for the ideals of equality and justice that the nation professed but did not practice. This is a form of patriotism that is far more demanding and courageous than simple, unquestioning loyalty. It is a patriotism that holds the nation accountable to its own highest ideals, that serves the country not just as it is, but as it ought to be. The men of the 761st were not just soldiers, they were reformers, using their service and their sacrifice as a powerful argument for change. Finally, their long 30-year battle for recognition is a stark and painful reminder of how history is written and how easily truth can be buried. The erasure of their story from the initial histories of World War II was not an accident. It was a choice. It was a choice to prioritize a comfortable, unified narrative over a more complex and truthful one. The story of heroic black soldiers excelling in combat was an inconvenient truth for a nation still grappling with the deep-seated hypocrisy of Jim Crow. To celebrate the 761st would have been to implicitly condemn the system that had tried to hold them back. So, for a generation, it was easier to simply forget. Their eventual vindication, won through the tireless efforts of the veterans themselves and their allies, is a victory for historical honesty. It proves that the official record can be corrected, that forgotten heroes can be remembered, and that the fight for a nation's memory is a battle as important as any fought on the ground. The story of the Black Panthers is a testament to the fact that while justice can be delayed, it cannot, in the end, be denied to those who refuse to stop fighting for it. User Sledushi block 1000 plus slough. Model you got it, bro. We're in the final stretch. This block will serve as the bridge from their historical legacy to the direct, personal lessons the audience can take away. It's about translating their struggle into a timeless message of defiance and dignity, much like we did in the previous scripts. This sets up the powerful finale. Here is Block 8. The story of the 761st Tank Battalion is not one that should be confined to the pages of military history. It is a living, breathing lesson that resonates with a powerful and urgent clarity in our world today. To view their journey as a completed chapter is to miss the timeless wisdom woven into the fabric of their struggle. Their experience provides a powerful blueprint for confronting systemic injustice, for understanding the true nature of strength, and for redefining the very meaning of honor. First, their journey from unwanted experiment to elite spearhead battalion is a masterclass in the power of performance to shatter prejudice. The entire rationale for their segregated training and their delayed deployment was based on a racist fiction, the idea that they were inherently incapable. They could not argue their way out of this fiction. They could not protest their way out of it. The only way to destroy the lie was to demonstrate its absurdity through overwhelming, undeniable competence. In every phase of their service, from the brutal training in Louisiana to the frozen hell of the Ardennes, they performed with a level of excellence that made the racist assumptions of their superiors look not just wrong, but foolish. This is a profound and timeless strategy for any group or individual facing a world of low expectations. You cannot always control the narrative that is told about you, but you can control the quality of your work. The 761st proved that consistent, undeniable excellence is the most powerful weapon against bigotry. It is a truth that cannot be argued with. It can only be witnessed. Second, the life and posthumous honor of Sergeant Reuben Rivers serves as a powerful, individual symbol for the battalion's collective struggle. His story is a microcosm of their entire experience. He was a man of quiet, almost stoic courage, who in the heat of battle performed acts of heroism that were almost beyond comprehension. He was recommended for the nation's highest honor by the men who saw his valor firsthand, yet that honor was denied by a distant, prejudiced bureaucracy. And for 53 years, his story, like that of his battalion, was a ghost, a tale of injustice known to a few but denied by the many. His eventual receipt of the Medal of Honor was not just a correction of one man's record. It was a symbolic victory for every soldier of the 761st. It was a national admission that a hero is a hero, regardless of color, and that courage is a quality of the soul, not the skin. His story teaches us that the fight for an individual's honor can become a fight for the honor of an entire community, and that such a fight, no matter how long it takes, is always worth waging. Third, their complicated relationship with General George S. Patton is a fascinating and instructive lesson in the nature of pragmatism and prejudice. Patton was no friend to the black man. His diaries and letters are filled with the casual racism of his era. Yet, on the battlefield, his pragmatism overrode his prejudice. His desire to win was stronger than his commitment to segregation. He did not ask for the 761st because he believed in racial equality. He asked for them because he believed they could help him kill Germans and win the war. This is a stark and perhaps cynical lesson, but an important one. It shows that sometimes progress is not driven by a change of heart, but by a change in circumstances. The 761st did not change Patton's personal beliefs about race, but they changed his professional assessment of their capabilities. They made themselves so valuable, so essential to the mission, that their race became secondary to their effectiveness. It is a powerful example of how, in the face of an immovable wall of prejudice, the surest path forward is often to make yourself indispensable. Finally, the very existence of the Black Panthers as a tank battalion was a revolutionary act. The tank in World War II was the ultimate symbol of modern mechanized power. It was the domain of a technological elite. To place black men in command of these machines was a profound, if reluctant, statement. It was an admission that they were capable of mastering the most advanced and powerful technology of the era. This was a direct assault on the paternalistic, racist stereotypes that portrayed black people as simple, rural folk, unfit for the complexities of the modern world. Every time a 761st crew rolled their Sherman into battle, they were not just fighting the enemy. They were driving a 30-ton steel refutation of a century of lies. They were proving that they were not just a part of America's past, but an integral part of its technological and military future. Their story is a powerful testament to the idea that true equality is achieved not just through laws and protests, but through the demonstration of mastery in every field of human endeavor. As we look back on the epic saga of the 761st Tank Battalion, it becomes evident that their story is not just a military history. It is a profound and uniquely American story. It encapsulates the nation's highest ideals and its most painful contradictions, all within the narrative of one single unit. They were men who were asked to fight for a double victory, one against a foreign tyrant, and one against the tyranny of prejudice at home. And in their relentless pursuit of that double V, they held up a mirror to the nation, forcing it to confront the vast and troubling gap between its creed and its conduct. Their journey is a powerful meditation on the concept of belonging. From the moment of their creation, they were treated as outsiders within the very organization they had sworn to serve. The segregated camp at Montford Point for the Marines, and similar camps like Claiborne for the 761st, were physical manifestations of a national ideology that said, "You are with us, but you are not of us." The constant skepticism, the delayed deployment, the initial relegation to support roles, all of it was a message that they did not truly belong in the brotherhood of American warriors. And yet, their entire service was an act of defiant belonging. They did not just accept the uniform, they claimed it. They did not just fight under the flag, they bled for it, embodying its ideals with a purity that often shamed the very system that had marginalized them. They proved that belonging is not something that is granted by others. It is something that is earned through sacrifice, demonstrated through excellence, and claimed through an unbreakable will. Furthermore, their story challenges our modern understanding of what it means to be a hero. In our contemporary culture, we are often drawn to stories of individual genius or singular spectacular acts. The story of the 761st is a powerful counter-narrative. It is a story of collective heroism, of a brotherhood that was stronger than any single man. While individuals like Sergeant Reuben Rivers performed acts of almost superhuman bravery, his courage was a product of the unit's collective spirit. He refused to be evacuated because he would not leave his men. This ethos of mutual reliance, of shared sacrifice, was the true source of their strength. It is a reminder that the greatest acts of heroism are often not performed for a flag or a country, but for the person fighting beside you. The 761st was a testament to the fact that a well-trained, cohesive, and motivated team can be the most powerful force on any battlefield, far more powerful than a collection of talented individuals. Their legacy is also a crucial lesson in the politics of memory. The fact that their story, and the story of the nearly 1 million other African Americans who served in World War II, was so effectively erased for so long, is a chilling indictment of how history is constructed. History is not a neutral recitation of facts. It is a narrative, and narratives are shaped by those in power. The post-war narrative required a simple story of a unified America, the greatest generation, coming together to save the world. The inconvenient truth of a segregated military, of heroes like the 761st who had to fight a war on two fronts, complicated that narrative. So, it was buried. The long fight of the veterans to have their story told, culminating in the Presidential Unit Citation and the Medal of Honor for Reuben Rivers, was not just a fight for personal validation. It was a fight to correct the historical record, to force the nation to acknowledge a more complex, more painful, and ultimately, more truthful version of its own past. And so, we are left with the enduring image of the Black Panther emblem on the side of a Sherman tank, rolling through the war-torn fields of Europe. It is a symbol of immense power and profound contradiction. It represents a group of men who were at once the instruments of American military power and the victims of American social prejudice. They were liberators who were not themselves fully free. They were heroes who had to spend a lifetime fighting to be recognized as such. Their story is not a simple, feel-good tale of triumph. It is a messy, complicated, and deeply human story of struggle and resilience. It is a story of men who were given every reason to fail, every reason to quit, every reason to despair, and who chose, instead, to come out fighting and to keep fighting until the war and the peace that followed was finally won. We began this story with a question, a doubt, posed by a general and an entire nation. Could black men fight in tanks? Could they master the complex machinery of modern warfare and stand against the best of the German army? The 761st Tank Battalion answered that question not with words, but with 183 consecutive days of brutal, unrelenting combat. They answered it in the mud of France, in the frozen hell of the Ardennes, and in the horrifying discovery at Gunskirchen. They answered it with their courage, their discipline, and their blood. The answer was a definitive, resounding yes. The story of the Black Panthers is a masterclass in the art of turning prejudice into fuel. They were told they were inferior, so they trained to be superior. They were expected to fail, so they fought with a ferocity that made them legendary. They were denied the full respect of the nation they served, so they forged a brotherhood of their own that was unbreakable. Their entire existence was an act of defiance, a refusal to be defined by the low expectations of a racist world. They did not just fight a war, they fought a perception, and they won both. Their legacy is a powerful and necessary part of the American story because it is so complex. It is at once a story of immense triumph and profound tragedy. The triumph is in their undeniable combat record, their role as Patton's spearhead, their contribution to the defeat of Nazi Germany. The tragedy is in the fact that they had to prove their worth in the first place, that their heroism was met with decades of silence and neglect, that men like Reuben Rivers had to wait half a century for the honor they had earned in a heartbeat. To tell their story is to embrace this difficult duality. It is to celebrate their incredible achievements while simultaneously condemning the injustice that made those achievements so necessary. So, the next time you see the iconic images of World War II, the landing craft on D-Day, the flag raising on Iwo Jima, the triumphant marches through Paris, remember the story that is often left out of the frame. Remember the tankers of the 761st, the Black Panthers who were there in the thick of it. Remember the men who were told they couldn't, and who did. Remember the crew of a Sherman tank, huddled for warmth in the biting cold of the Ardennes, knowing they were fighting for a country that did not yet fully see them as men. Their story is a testament to the fact that the human spirit, when bound by a common purpose and a refusal to be broken, is the most powerful force on earth. It is a reminder that the title of hero is earned not through the color of one's skin, but through the courage in one's heart. They were given a motto, "Come out fighting." But it was more than a motto. It was the story of their lives. They came out fighting against the bigotry that sought to deny them a chance. They came out fighting against the best of the German army, and they came out fighting for their own history, for their own memory, for the recognition they had so dearly earned. They were not just the first. They were among the finest. They were not just Negro tankers. They were American soldiers who helped to save the world. They were the men of the 761st Tank Battalion. And their story, now finally brought out of the shadows, is a permanent and powerful part of the legacy of the greatest generation. To remember them is not just to correct the historical record. It is to honor the very ideals of courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in a better America that they fought and died for. Their war is over. Their fight for recognition has been won, but their legacy, the powerful example of their unbreakable will echo forever.